Imagine for just a second that you knew within about the next 24 hours that you were going to die. How would you spend your time? What would you do? What kinds of conversations might you want to have? That was actually a question that was posed to us during one of our small group icebreaker moments recently. And as all of us shared, there were a lot of differences, of course, in regard to the things that we would do, but there were some similarities that emerged. There was a lot of food that was being eaten in that last 24 hours, and there were a lot of adventures that people were going on. And there was also just the recognition of the fact that we would probably spend some of that time praying too. Right? I mean, think about it. Like if you literally knew that within 18 to 24 hours that your life was going to end, there would probably be a certain set of things that you would want to say to other people. There'd probably be a certain set of things that you would want to say to God. There would probably be some things that you would want to eat, right? I mean, there are going to be those consistencies. And believe it or not, about 18 to 24 hours before Jesus died, he did some of those same exact things. He ate with some of the people that he loved most, and he spent some time praying. And if you go back and you look at Jesus' last prayer for his disciples, in particular in the Gospel of John, which is what we're going to look at today in John 17, if you were to go back and look and see what it is that Jesus prays for, you're going to see that he prays for unity or community, if you will. Last words always have a tendency to get recorded, don't they? Some last words are recorded, but they're silly, right? Like what you say in your senior yearbook. Right? Think back when you graduated high school, and if that was one of the traditions that your high school had, every senior got a chance to put a little quote in there. Those are your last words to your high school, right? Or think about how many times people reflect on what was said at someone's deathbed. Or your last will and testament, right? Last words are really important. And evidently, if Jesus' last prayer, if his last words to his Father in prayer were for unity, it's evidently pretty important. But have you ever considered the fact that when you really bring into full focus, not only Jesus' last prayer that we're going to have Emily read for us in just a minute, in John 17, Jesus prays for community, but in his last command to his disciples, after his resurrection, but before his ascension, he tells his disciples that they need to go and they need to make more disciples. He gives them a command about mission. And in Jesus' last teaching before his ascension, in Luke chapter 24, Jesus basically takes his disciples on a Bible study throughout all of the Old Testament, and he shows them where the gospel is hinted at all throughout it. Gospel, community, and mission. Those three things are evidently so important to Jesus that they were all of his last command, his last teaching, his last prayer. And if gospel, community, and mission are the things that were on Jesus' mind last for his disciples, they probably ought to be important to us as a church. It's not because we need something to put in our bulletins that we say that we want to be about the centrality of the gospel and transformational community and missional movement. It's not because we need something catchy to talk about. It's that we really do believe that this is core to the heart of Jesus. And that as his followers, these are the things that we need to be about. They're the things that we need to be focused on, talking about, committed to, and practicing in our lives. Gospel, community, and mission. And we've been working our way through this new sermon series, and Nathaniel, the last 2 weeks, unpacked some of the meaning, the rich meaning of the centrality of the gospel. The first week in Genesis 15, he talked about the scope of the gospel, that the gospel has this cosmic scope to it. It's God's commitment to renew all things through his gracious work through Jesus Christ. And it's not just that the scope is cosmic, it's that God is gracious. It's God who walked through the two halves of those animals. It's God that took upon himself the punishment due to our sin. And he did it because he loves an undeserving people. And then last week, Nathaniel talked in 1 Corinthians 15 about our need for gospel renewal, the process of gospel renewal, and the fruit of gospel renewal. And we're going to spend the next 2 weeks unpacking what it means for us to live into the reality of transformational community. But I want you, as we prepare our hearts to hear this passage of Scripture read, I want you to imagine something else for just a second. Imagine your biggest hero. Maybe it's somebody who lived way back in history. It's Abraham Lincoln, or it's Socrates. I don't know who it might be. Maybe it's Michael Jordan. Imagine who your hero is, and imagine that after your hero died or dies, that people are looking through some of the things that they own. They're looking through their computer files. They're looking through old letters that they wrote. And I want you to imagine that when historians find that stuff, they find that that person, your hero, said something about you. Wrote something about you. Because that is what you are going to hear as Emily comes to read the scriptures for us this morning. If you have your Bibles, turn to John 17, 20 through 26, as Emily comes to read for us this morning.
I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one, I in them, and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me, and loved them as you loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me, because you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I have made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. This is the word of the Lord.
As Jesus makes this prayer, I want you to remember the fact that he's praying for us. He says, I'm not just praying for these, not just the disciples that are right in my midst right now. I'm praying for the ones who are going to be sitting in a CrossFit gym in February of 2021 in Beverly, Massachusetts, and I'm praying that they would be one. I'm praying that they would live as a community. Now, as I think about this and as we work our way through the text, I think primarily Jesus is praying. He's doing two things in this prayer, and the first is this. He's inviting us to experience his loving community. Did you notice there were some important repeated words in that prayer? Like when you just read through those 6 verses, to be quite honest, it's kind of a mouthful, isn't it, Emily? As you read through it, it's a little tricky to get through because the phrasing it's weird. It's different. It's not what we're used to. But Jesus comes back to a few words a number of times. One of the words is the word one. 4 times he says, I pray that they would be one. And then 8 times Jesus uses this prepositional phrase, I want them to be in me just as I am in you, or I want them to be in us. 8 times Jesus uses that language. But what Jesus is doing with all of that, he's praying that the intimacy that we have, the union that we have with the Father and with one another would be just as close as the intimacy that he has with the Father. There are some comparison clauses there too. I want them to be one just as we are one, Father. I want to convey my love to them just as you have shown your love to me, O Father. See, Jesus is inviting us to experience his loving community. I want them not just to know, head knowledge, the love that you have for them. I want them to experience it. I want them to live into and live out of our loving community. The same kind of loving community that the Father and the Son and the Spirit have. Now, that sounds so abstract, doesn't it? What does that look like? And that's what we're going to try to work through unpacking this morning. But I want you to think back to maybe a time in your life when you were growing up. Maybe it's now, I don't know. But think back to a moment in your life where you longed to belong. When I was growing up, I moved around quite a bit. There was a deep longing for me to just be able to fit in, to belong. That seems to be an ancient desire of every human heart, right? It's an ancient need for us. It's a deep ache within the human heart to belong somewhere. You even see it, if you will, back all the way in Genesis chapter 2. When God created mankind, he didn't just make one. In Genesis 2:18, God said it's not good for a human being to be alone. We're created in the image of a relational God. God is triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He has never known loneliness, except for when Jesus himself walked this earth and was cut off in our place. But God is a relational God. We, made in his image, were never made to try to individually craft or create a sense of being or self. And yet today, all the time, that's what we're encouraged to do. Define yourself. Describe who you are. It is impossible. No matter how many times you try to come up with your own sense of self, your own identity, to manufacture or curate a sense of self, if you're trying to do that apart from relationship, I promise you, you will fail. It is an impossibility. And the reason why it is an impossibility is because you and I were created in the image of a relational God. We are inescapably relational beings. So no matter how much I might try to manufacture my own sense of self, at the end of the day, I'm going to want someone else to stand there and applaud. I want to belong. So what we may do when we try to manufacture our own sense of self, we may trade groups of cheerleaders, but that's all we're doing. So even though our culture would say you can create your own sense of self, just go for it. Live as autonomously as you want. Do it. Let me just tell you, you're not only going to be dissatisfied, you're going to be really disappointed because it's an impossibility. We are made for community. And Jesus, I want you to, again, just stop and think about this. He prays that because we are made for community, he prays that we would experience the same kind that he has with the Father. It's not just that we would experience some kind of community, it's that we would experience his kind of community. That literally, if you look back at the text, that is exactly what Jesus is praying. And he's praying that we, as a church, as a body, that we would make that manifest. That's crazy. But it was on his mind hours before he went to the cross. But before we get into what it means to really experience the same kind of loving community that God has, before we get into that, before we talk about what that might look like and how it might happen, ask yourself this question: what problem does Jesus' prayer for unity, or his prayer for community, what problem does that address? God, I want them to be one with us. And I want them to be one with one another. What problem is Jesus praying that God would address? What is he aiming to solve when he asked this question? Why would Jesus be praying about this hours before he dies? He's praying for relationship with God and relationship with us, between us. Now, when you think about your relationship with God, when you think about your relationship with other people in your life, what characterizes those relationships? Would you say it's the word unity? Is that most common in your relationships? Yeah, we're totally united. We're always on the same page. Absolutely not. That's not what typifies relationship. How about splintering? How about feeling fractured and opposed and some hostility? All of that has been with us, going all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. And so Jesus here, hours before he dies, he's praying that God would put all that back together again. This morning, even as I was reading, and I was just doing my morning devotions today, I came across this quote, and I thought this just had to go into today's sermon because it fits so well with what we're talking about. Listen to this. While most of our dysfunction and woundedness stems from a hurtful experience in family or in community, our healing and our wholeness comes in the context of God's renewed family and community. That's what Jesus is praying for. Hours before he dies, he knows that going all the way back to Genesis 3, opposition, hostility, fracturing of relationships happened between us and God and between one another. And Jesus is now praying hours before he goes to the cross that as God is creating this new family, this new community, that we would find healing and wholeness. It's his prayer. He's praying that we would experience God's loving community here with one another. But how is that going to happen? Well, Jesus gives us some hints. Verse 24 and 26, Jesus says in verse 24, Lord, I want them to see my glory. And then in verse 26, Jesus says, I have proclaimed your name to them, and I want to continue proclaiming your name to them. Now, when you hear that word glory and name together, if you were a Jew, and if we really were steeped in the Old Testament, our minds would begin throwing up red flares to some passages, particularly one passage in the Old Testament. It's the story that happens in Exodus 33 and 34. Remember, Moses is there. It's right after God's people have sinned with the golden calf. And God says that he's willing to forgive them. But Moses says, God, I want you to show me your glory. I want you to declare your name to me. And remember that scene? Moses is hidden in a cleft in the rock, and God passed before, and he declares his name. He says, I'm the Lord, the Lord. Do you remember what God says? The Lord, the Lord. Then what else? Gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. But I will by no means clear the guilty. Hours before Jesus dies, he says, God, I want to reveal your glory to these people. I want to declare your name to my disciples. How is Jesus going to do all of that? It's a similar situation. It's a similar scene because hours later, Jesus is going to hang up on the cross and he's going to demonstrate the glory of God. He's going to declare the name of God there. He's going to show that the Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, but will by no means clear the guilty. You see it? Jesus, hours before he dies, he's praying that God will demonstrate the fullness of his community, that God will put back together what we have broken because of our sin. And have you ever noticed, even if you were to flip over just one page in John's gospel, when Jesus is hanging on the cross and he looks down from the cross and he sees John and his own mother standing there, what does he do? He creates a new family. He creates a new community. See, even though we've experienced hurt and pain from family and community, it's because of the cross. It's because what Jesus has done as he creates a new family, a new community. It's here as we tell one another the gospel. As we live it out before one another, it's here that we experience his loving community. But there are a lot of substitutes that we try. We've already talked about how we try individualism. That's culture's preference. You don't need community. Just define yourself. Just find wholeness. Try to find healing on your own. You're going to fail. You were never meant to live that way. But what about some other ones? We try technological community today, don't we? Right? We can conveniently curate our own sense of self. We can connect to people, but we stay at a distance, and we only show people what we want them to see. That's not true community. Or we try consumerism. Strangely enough, consumerism can almost camouflage itself as community. Robert Bella, in his book, Habits of the Heart, he describes how consumerism, our tendency to just buy stuff, how it can camouflage itself as community. He says, in essence, that what we do is we think that the consumption of some good is going to bring about the good life for us. But then the more that we consume that, the more bored we get with that thing that we're consuming. So then what we try to do is we try to find other people who like to consume that same thing, and we just get together with them and we consume it together. But the problem is that if we ever give up consuming that good, we don't have community anymore. If you join a motorcycle gang, and if you're a part of a motorcycle gang, there may not be anything wrong with that, by the way, but if you join a motorcycle gang and then you sell your motorcycle, guess what? Your community is kind of broken. But there's a danger within the church that we might treat church as consumers. We come here, and rather than investing in relationships, we just consume spiritual goods. Rather than really going deep with one another, we're just here because we don't have anything better to do on Sunday morning, and this seems to be the place that we enjoy being more than any other one. But there's no real commitment like we saw being made this morning. See, we have to go beyond consumerism, but we also have to not think about community within the church with idealism, because that's another substitute form of true community. Idealism is that tendency for us to think that church community ought to be a certain way. But the problem with that is that our expectations and our descriptions of a perfect community aren't someone else's. One of the guys that mentored me, he actually told me before I came to seminary, he said, Derek, if you ever find a perfect church, you should leave it because you're going to screw it up. It's true. There is no perfect church community. It is easy to love an ideal church, but Jesus didn't ask us to do that. He asked us to love the real one. Can I just say, we are going to disappoint one another in this community. It's going to happen. That's not an excuse, it's just a reality. But the good news is that Jesus has given us gospel resource within the community when we disappoint or hurt one another. It's resource like humility and forgiveness and repentance and confession and accountability. It's all of the one another texts, bear with one another, all throughout the New Testament. It's having hard conversations and moving to love one another. See, if we're going to experience the loving community that Jesus intends, we can't fall in love with an idealistic vision of community. We have to fall in love with the real church. Dietrich Bonhoeffer once put it like this. He said, the bright day of Christian community dawns wherever the early morning mist of dream visions are lifting. In other words, don't think idealistically about church community. Rather, Christian community is not an ideal that we have to realize. It's a reality that's created by God in Christ in which we may participate. And Jesus is praying that we would participate within that community, that we would experience his community. But there's at least one more substitute form of community, and it's tribalism. And this one happens all the time in the church. I call this moat or castle and moat Christianity. It's the situation where we view ourselves as the church as militantly opposed to everyone else out there in the world. We pull into the church, we raise up the drawbridge, and every once in a while we lob grenades over the outside wall. But we don't really engage in any meaningful relationship with anybody on the outside. Or one of my seminary professors described this as musk ox Christianity. A musk ox, when it's in danger, when it's threatened, it gets into a circle and it just kicks everybody that's coming at them. Man, we see this in the church all the time today. We not only see ourselves doing it to others in the world, we see ourselves doing it across denominations, don't we? Jesus prayed against all that. I love the way that Richard Baxter put it. He said, in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. But in all things, charity. Do we love with the same kind of communal heart that Jesus had? And the tendency when we move into tribalism is we get there walking backwards, don't we? We're constantly living in fear, and we say, you know what, I don't want to become that, and I don't want to become that, and I don't want to become that, and I definitely don't want to become that over there. And so we just keep backing ourselves up until we're with people who view life the exact same way that we do. And anytime someone comes at us, we just kick them. But tribalism is a substitute form of community. It's not the kind of community that Jesus was praying for. And we can't do this, and I'll tell you more about why in just a second. But do you hear in Jesus' prayer, do you hear his invitation? He is inviting you into a loving community with God, and it is free and it is available. Are you practicing it? Are you getting deep, intimate with God? Do you have this kind of experience that Jesus is describing, not only with God, but with others that you might be sitting around this morning? Are you experiencing this here at Center Grace? How can you do that? Hospitality. There are lots of avenues that you can begin practicing this kind of loving community through. Hospitality. Small groups, Bible studies, discipleship groups, youth group. There are lots of opportunities. We want you to experience the same kind of loving community that the Father has with the Son, because Jesus prayed for it. And remember that we have, before the word community, we have the word transformational there. And it's important. We are not, I repeat, we are not interested in being a community where you can stay as you are. You come as you are. Every week, like Nathaniel said, we want you to come as you are. Absolutely. Warts and all. Come, bring your baggage, bring your addiction, bring your brokenness, bring whatever it is that you have. Bring it here, but Jesus will not let you stay the same. Because the same grace that invites you and me into his presence as sinners is the same grace that challenges and transforms us. Jesus is inviting us to experience his loving community. But what is community? What is unity? That's a compound word, isn't it? Community, common unity, community, common unity. It takes three things for community to really be true, to be the kind of community that I think Jesus is praying about. It takes, first and foremost, relationship. It takes intimacy and accountability. You can't have true community without relationship. But then secondly, you also need companionship. That gets to the sharing of needs and vulnerability. You've got to have relationship, you've got to have companionship, and then believe it or not, you need partnership. You share a purpose. You share a mission together. That's what true community is. And Jesus is going to show us that mission in just a second. But what does that look like? What would community like that look like? We were talking about this on Thursday night as a small group, as we were previewing this text, and one of our small group members very wisely said, well, what does that look like? Let's give some examples of that. Don't leave community in the abstract. And we started talking about other experiences in life where we've experienced hints of this. Have you ever done a puzzle? Have you ever done a puzzle and then been missing like one or two pieces? Man, that totally stinks. But when the puzzle is completely filled in, it's like it's unity. There's community there. All the pieces are in relationship with one another. There's a purpose. There's a big picture that you're actually showing. Or have you ever thought about how the human body demonstrates this idea of unity or community? Different parts, but they make up one whole. Maybe you've been a part of a sports team and you know that everybody plays a different position, but you're all striving after the same goal. See, we have aches or echoes of community. But in the church, that's where it's really to be experienced, because it's a lasting community. It never ends. And it's not just that Jesus wants us to experience it. He wants us to express his loving community. This is why tribalism doesn't work as a substitute. 6 times in this passage, Jesus says, in order that. I pray that they would be one, in order that. Or maybe some of your translations have so that the world might know, so that the world might believe. Mission, purpose. Jesus says, I want them to experience our community, O Father, so that then they might express it. Castle and moat Christianity will not work. Have you ever thought about the fact that the early church, in 100 AD, by most estimates, the early church was made up of at most 25,000 people. But by 310, in just over 200 years, it's estimated that the church had grown to over 20 million people. From 25,000 to 20 million in just over 200 years. How? Well, let's say what it wasn't because of. It wasn't because the church had political power. The church was completely marginalized. At best, it was tolerated. In its worst moments, it was persecuted even to the point of death. It wasn't because they had sweet buildings. They met in places like CrossFit gyms. It must have been because of their community and their desire to disciple one another. They learned the way of Jesus and they practiced it. They loved one another and even their enemies. See, it's not just that Jesus wants us to experience his loving community, he wants us to express it. And that community in the early church, it cut across race, it cut across ethnicity, it cut across socioeconomic status, it cut across class, and it welcomed both men and women. The church demonstrated an unheard of, unexpressed, unexperienced community in the ancient world. What about now? See, God's community shaping love was being experienced and expressed then, and Jesus always wants that to be the case. In John 13:35, he said, "They will know that you are mine by the way that you love one another." Look at this quote from Leslie Newbegin. This missionary to India who once wrote, "The primary reality of which we have to take account in seeking for a Christian impact on public life is the Christian congregation." Notice what he doesn't say. There are lots of things he doesn't say. But the biggest impact that we are going to have on public life is us. How is it possible that the gospel should be credible, that people should come to believe that the power which has the last word in all human affairs is represented by a man hanging on the cross? How is that going to be possible? The only answer, the only hermeneutic of the gospel, in other words, the only interpretive key, is a congregation of men and women who believe it and live by it. Whew. Not just experiencing community, but expressing it. And Jesus' tactics, when he was on the earth, his tactics are the same that we ought to have. He said, as we already saw, that his desire was to make known and to continue to make known the name of God. He brought people into community and he demonstrated the character of God to them. That's what he did. He experienced community and he expressed it. He didn't manipulate. He didn't coerce. He didn't bully. He didn't make a demand. He offered. He graciously and truthfully spoke with invitation, and he left it there. And the implicit reality of Jesus' ministry is that we would do it too, that we would experience God's community, and that we would be so transformed by his shaping love that we would begin to express it. Why? 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 Why, Jesus? Why would you pray for this? Why would you want this? Because of all the brokenness, because of all the fracturing, because of all of the failures within all of the other relationships and communities, because of our sin, and because the world needs to know. Verse 25, because the world doesn't know you, God. That's why I want this for my people. I want them to experience community, and I want them to express it. How? How do we express it? It gets back to something that we've talked about before. It gets back to three simple things, three simple words: up, in, and out. Up. Are we taking opportunities? Are we creating and taking opportunities for spiritual renewal? Word and prayer and sacrament, time together. In. emotional recharging, like honesty and accountability in relationship, physical refreshment, like hospitality and play with one another? Are we doing that as the body of Christ? Out. Missional movement. Are we demonstrating the reality of the gospel? Are we speaking it and living it out in front of people? And behind the scenes of Jesus' prayer here, church, is the Trinity, a community that experiences and expresses divine love constantly. But the Trinity does not practice musk ox kinds of community where they just huddle up and they kick everybody that comes up to them. The Trinity is an outward-facing community all the time. Have you ever played blob tag? Blob tag's a weird game. It's where you start with just one person who is it, and then as you tag one person, the two people then become it, and they try to tag other people, and then the 3 or 4 people begin trying to tag all the people. And then after a while, you've just got this huge mass of people running around the field trying to tag all the other people and bring them in. That's kind of what the Trinity's like. That's kind of what we are supposed to be like. Experiencing and expressing the loving community that the Father and the Son and the Spirit have. Now, I asked you at the beginning of our time today to imagine that you only had 18 to 24 hours left. How would you spend your time? What would you say? Let's close with imagining something else. Imagine that the creator of the universe is inviting you into loving relationship with him. What will you do in this next week to participate in that? Imagine that within this community, there is a desire to experience and express the loving community that God has among one another. What will you do in the next week to make that more of a reality in your life? But be sure God is inviting us to experience, and he is expecting us to express his loving community. Father, we thank you that you have invited us into the same kind of intimacy that you have with your Son and with the Spirit. Father, I pray that you would bind us together in this unity, this love, the glory of your name. And Lord, that those of us who are especially in these moments experiencing brokenness, feeling the weight of past hurts, Lord, I pray that through your love, expressed through the scriptures, expressed through your Spirit, but also expressed through this community, I pray that that would begin putting us back together again. God, help us not to settle for any substitute, but to press deeply into this invitation. And we ask in your name. Amen.